Слово имеет Мэри Мортон, руководитель отдела французской живописи Национальной галереи Вашингтон. So Mary Morton, Durand-Ruel's Impressionism, Creating the Canon, на the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C. Импрессионизм Durand-Ruel, создание канона.
Thank you very much for your interest in this paper. I wanted to thank in particular Ilya Doronchenko for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here from the gallery and thrilled to be in Russia for my very first time. So let's dive in because we've got lots of papers this afternoon. I really enjoyed the papers this morning. I'm particularly interested in art historiography. And so I was paying special attention to the impact of Morozov and Shukin on their collecting and their collections on art history, both in Russia and more broadly in Europe. But I'd like to back up a little bit chronologically and look at the role of dealers and the market and the impact of dealers on art history and its narrative for the arguably first modernist movement in painting, which is called Impressionism. While Impressionism is broadly understood as a movement in landscape painting and the immediate experiential transcription of the French countryside and its fashionable inhabitants in loose, colorful brushwork, a systematic review of the content of the 8 exhibitions that occurred in various locations on the right bank in Paris between 1874 and 1886 reveals a significantly more diverse range of styles and subjects. In deeply unsettling and, in responding to modernité, some exhibiting artists produced images that critics found deeply unsettling and subversive, with a jarring edge quite apart from the stereotypically pleasant works like Claude Monet, Auguste Renoir, and Camille Pissarro. Recent research has shown more clearly the degree to which one man, Paul Durand-Ruel, let's see, how does this advance? There we go. I got it.
Good. Okay, got it.
This is the cover of the exhibitions in London and Philadelphia from 2015. Extraordinary research went into the mounting of this exhibition and the creation of its catalog, and showed how Durand-Ruel, the man, his descendants, and his archive invented, as you see, or discovered, what is popularly perceived as Impressionism and, quote, the significant role that circulation, presentation, and the diffusion of works play in the creation of aesthetic values and of a pantheon long held to be absolute, end quote. Durand-Ruel supported the young radical painters by building his dealer stock in purchases directly from them and mediating sales to other collectors and dealers. He organized exhibitions in his gallery and cultivated the private collectors whose gifts would form the core of the French National Collection, currently housed at the Musée d'Orsay. Beginning in the mid-1880s, he created an American market for Impressionism, building the collections that would seed museums across the United States. These museum holdings, alongside the firm's archive, were the primary sources for the Bible of Impressionist studies, John Rewald's 2-volume History of Impressionism, first published in 1946. Partially funded by the Durand-Ruel Gallery, Rewald's tomes are second only to those of Leonello Venturi's Archives of Impressionism of 1939. Published by Durand-Ruel and drawn entirely from his archives in establishing the foundation for Impressionist studies. This paper suggests that Durand-Ruel's Impressionism and his pantheon of aesthetic values were formed not only by the dealer's sense of what might be commercially viable and his faith in his own artistic judgment, but also a deeply felt social conservatism. He was, by all accounts, a passionate monarchist and a militant Catholic, with an activist devotion to the pillars of stability represented by king and church. Sidelining the countercultural critique of the intransigent exhibitors at the Impressionist exhibitions, Durand-Ruel molded a group of artists whose work was both commercially oriented and generally unthreatening to his social values. Indeed, throughout his correspondence, he betrays a devotion to his artists that suggests the degree to which he personally identified with them and their work. One artist with whom he seems not to have bonded in this way was Gustave Courbet. Despite Courbet's central role in the Impressionist exhibitions, equaled only by that of Edgar Degas and Camille Pissarro, he did not belong to Durand-Ruel's pantheon. A closer look at Durand-Ruel's Impressionist canon, as well as the work of the Impressionist artist that was excluded from it, illuminates this formative moment in Impressionist historiography. In his memoirs, Durand-Ruel describes a difficult family history in France, dating back to the late 18th century, in which his grandparents and his parents would achieve a level of financial stability and social prominence only to have it destroyed by leftist revolutions. His father embraced the successful coup of Napoleon III in 1851, which restored a sense of order and fiscal confidence for middle-class Frenchmen. As a young man, Durand-Ruel considered a career in either the Catholic Church or the army. And although the family business called him away from both, he claimed late in life, "I was a born missionary." During the early Third Republic, he remained anti-republican, pinning his hopes for a monarchic restoration on the Comte de Chambord. He was also a committed activist in defense of the Catholic Church and against state reforms that sought to reduce its traditional influence on public education. Central to Durand-Ruel's ideology of church and state was the devotion to marriage and family as society's civilizing core. This view was in line with Third Republic policy that, following the humiliation of the Franco-Prussian War and the destructive violence of the Commune, celebrated the traditional patriarchal family as the locus of social and political stability and population regeneration. Advocates supported the sacred institution of marriage against the perceived threat of liberalizing forces unleashed during the French Revolution, including ongoing legislative pressures to legalize divorce, suppress birthrights, and establish husband and wife as legal equals. Institutional propaganda encouraged the ideal of women as domestic nurturers and men as virile, procreative breadwinners. Durand-Ruel had a reputation among his peers as a committed family man. At the age of 31, he married Eva Lafont, 10 years his junior, who was from a devout Catholic family and to whom he referred to in his memoirs as the ideal Christian mother. Eva died at the age of 30 of a pulmonary embolism, having borne 5 children in 9 years and pregnant with her 6th. Choosing not to remarry, Durand-Ruel took firm control of the moral and academic development of his children and cultivated a strict Christian family ethos. His sons were sent to a Jesuit school and his daughters to board at an Augustinian convent. From his early years in the business, Durand-Ruel's moral convictions and his missionary zeal affected his energetic work as a dealer. In addition to the landscape artists of the Barbizon School, the support for whom he had inherited from his father, he encouraged the academic painter William Bouguereau towards family-friendly subject matter. As a young man, Bouguereau also had planned a career in the Catholic Church, and painter and dealer became lifelong friends, regularly attending Mass at Saint-Augustin together. In the years following Napoleon III's purchase of Bouguereau's The Holy Family of 1863, presented to Empress Eugénie for the decoration of their personal apartment at the Tuileries, Durand-Ruel encouraged the painter towards more quasi-devotional images of young, comely mothers with healthy children, much like those of the dealer's other good friend, Hugues Merrill. And I'm just showing you several images across the 60s by Bouguereau of mothers and children. And here is one by Hugues Merrill, whose sentimental, moralizing painters Durand-Ruel also sold. Finding a receptive market for such works, Bouguereau continued to paint them for Durand-Ruel into the 1870s. In addition to creating a market for his preferred artists, bidding up prices at auction production, Durand-Ruel built significant stock in works by Monet, Renoir, Sisley, Pissarro, Boudin, and Degas during the early 1870s. In exhibitions in London, Brussels, and Paris, he positioned them alongside Barbizon School painters as the new generation of national landscapists celebrating the French countryside. He also began paying advances to the young artists, helping them with their bills and rent in return for exclusive representation, as well as a degree of artistic control. Courbet joined the group of independent artists for their second exhibition in 1876, hosted by Durand-Ruel in his gallery. He submitted 8 paintings and received significant critical attention, much of it positive. He was thrilled by the movement's radical possibilities, and he committed himself fully to the painters known as the intransigents, or Impressionists, as he put it in 1877. For the 1877 exhibition, Courbet found an apartment on Rue Le Pelletier, not far from Durand-Ruel's gallery, paid the rent, orchestrated the installation, and helped hang the pictures. Alongside Pissarro and Degas, Courbet instigated the 1879 exhibition as well, in a space in the Avenue de l'Opéra. He then threw himself into organizing the 4th show in 1880. As one critic commented, Courbet is the corporal, or king of the movement, or rather, given the Republican values of the group, the president. Courbet skipped the 1881 exhibition, but participated in the 7th in 1882. The following year, Durand-Ruel organized an exhibition in London of works by La Société des Impressionnistes, which included Mary Cassatt and Berthe Morisot, alongside Boudin, Degas, Manet, Monet, Pissarro, Sisley, and Renoir. This group show, the first with the moniker Impressionniste in the title, was Durand-Ruel's chance to define the collective. Manet was included, although he never exhibited in the Impressionist exhibitions, and Courbet was not, although he had been central to 5 of the 7. Also in 1883, the dealer began mounting monographic shows in an apartment on the Boulevard Madeleine, beginning with Boudin and followed by solo exhibitions for Monet, Renoir, Sisley, and Pissarro. While the artists welcomed the focused exposure, they noted with the increasing pressure to provide new work for Durand-Ruel's exhibitions. Renoir admitted of the dealer's control that the new painting is entirely in his hands. Paul Gauguin was more critical, accusing his fellow artists of prostituting themselves to Durand-Ruel. As sales picked up, and particularly after the success of the New York exhibitions in 1886 and 87, Durand-Ruel strengthened his demand for a monopoly with the artists. In his correspondence, he cast himself as their champion in a heroic narrative, the embattled underdog destined to triumph. In a letter to Monet in 1888, Durand-Ruel argues for first pick of the painter's work, quote, "I deserve it because without wanting to brag, I have struggled on your behalf in every land in the world. If art lovers are finally giving you the credit you deserve, believe me, it is the result of my repeated endeavors abroad, thanks to my unceasing efforts." As Durand-Ruel took control of the movement, Courbet's engagement seemed to drift. He skipped the 8th and final Impressionist exhibition in 1886 and exhibited only occasionally thereafter. Durand-Ruel continued to expand the market for his artists through the rest of the 1880s and 1890s with exhibitions in Paris, as well as Berlin, Munich, Vienna, Brussels, and New York. He placed advertisements in newspapers and art journals and hired established critics to write prefaces for his catalogs: Théodore Duret, Armand Sylvestre, Stéphane Mallarmé, Gustave Courbet, and Arsène Alexandre, among others, building the early historiography of Impressionism. At the same time, he was working closely with a small group of private collectors, including Étienne Moreau-Nelaton, Isaac de Camondo, and Antonin Personnaz, whose bequests formed the foundation of the Musée d'Orsay's Impressionist holdings. Durand-Ruel's aesthetic pantheon was enshrined by his personal collection, which he opened to the public as an extension of his mandate to elevate a contemporary public taste he felt was in desperate need of direction. And I'm showing you an image of his apartment at 35 Rue de Rome. You see him, he hung paintings of, you can see the Renoir in the background there. Here's another image of his apartment. You can make out a Monet, several Monets, Monet landscapes. Renoirs. And then I've just pulled out a couple of examples, this beautiful decorative panel of flowers. Rodin's young mother in the grotto, which you saw in one of those images. Mary Cassatt's baby's first caress. Renoir's sleeping girl with the cat. Monet landscape of Porte Coton. Renoir's dancer. The wonderful double panel of Dancing in the City and Dancing in the Country by Renoir. And, of course, the wonderful masterpiece, arguably, by Renoir, The Luncheon of the Boating Party. These works celebrate romantic and maternal love, classical French ballet, and colorful scenes of the French countryside, relatively conservative motifs that proved popular with his clients in Europe and the US. Caillebotte was the only core impressionist not represented. When Caillebotte died in 1894, Durand-Ruel hosted the memorial exhibition at his gallery. The catalog lists 122 paintings, but the dealer seems not to have commissioned a critical preface, as he generally did for his artists' monographic shows. Durand-Ruel sold a handful of riverscapes and flower paintings to various collectors, but he did not acquire any works for his stock. The majority of the oeuvre, including his major works that had been featured in the Impressionist exhibitions, reverted to Caillebotte's brother Martial's possession, where it remained unseen for decades. In 1905, Durand-Ruel organized the most complete retrospective of Impressionism to date at the Grafton Gallery in London, with 315 pictures, including 196 from his private collection. Both Caillebotte and another core impressionist, Mary Cassatt, were excluded. Cassatt was furious at consistently being marginalized by the dealer in his sales and exhibitions program, despite her active role in the Impressionist movement. That this ambitious American woman, unmarried and childless, whose work critiqued gendered norms as well as generic idealizations of childhood, might have somewhat put off Durand-Ruel, with significant ramifications for her role in the art historiography, deserves a separate study. As for Caillebotte, a closer look at his paintings suggests sources of the dealer's disaffection. Caillebotte had invested in Impressionism as an aesthetico-political movement, a fraternity of radicals with fundamental change as their aim, in addition to, but not wholly oriented toward sales. Inspired by the Baudelairean mantra of Impressionism to represent modernity in all its richness and complexity, Caillebotte's most critical work reveals a strain of independent vision enabled by the movement, but excluded from Durand-Ruel's pantheon of aesthetic values. Two of Caillebotte's most famous and best-known paintings are sharp-edged realist critiques of the new capital forged during the Second Empire. The Floor Scrapers, a genre scene of a particular form of contemporary urban labor ubiquitous in the new neighborhoods of Haussmann's Paris. It's Caillebotte presenting very starkly these workers' half-naked bodies molded by monotonous, repetitive tasks. And of course, this picture provoked a rejection from the Salon jury. He followed with a picture on the scale of a history painting, Paris Street Rainy Day, which would not likely have fared much better with a Salon jury, portraying a recently completed site in the late phase of Haussmann's massive urban renewal project. Critics remarked on the scene's eerily strict regulation of the architecture and the stripped and scrubbed sterility of this new city space. Caillebotte placed at center a bourgeois couple whose impassivity, sense of propriety and entitlement embody the new Paris, as well as a disturbing atomization and anomie in line with contemporary critics who bemoaned the loss of what they felt was a more organic and communal urban fabric. Pont de l'Europe features, quote, a small common drama, unquote, as one critic put it, particularly in the streets near the Gare Saint-Lazare. In bright daylight, a top-hatted gentleman has just passed a female street-walking prostitute, clearly differentiated in apparel from the bourgeois woman in Paris street rainy day. He gazes intently in the direction of a young laborer who leans against the cast iron railing. The scene is propelled by subtle glances and gestures, the furtive signs, easily confused and denied, used in the street sex trade. The painting responds to a recent amplification of Parisian vice squad efforts to control the burgeoning trade in sex among men, particularly in new quartiers of the 8th and 9th arrondissement, particularly near the train station, and usually between upper-class men and working-class youths. During the year that Courbet painted and exhibited this painting, this social problem broke into public consciousness in a series of newspaper articles. These affronts to public morality were felt to threaten the middle-class family on which social order depended, not to mention fertility rates, the decline of which also preoccupied Third Republic officials. Scenes of disillusionment and the contemporary institutions of marriage and family include Courbet's luncheon, the family ritual of the formal midday meal, a quasi-sacred bourgeois event of communion and harmony, warmth and plenitude, here cast as a scene of isolation and cool formality. The role of piano music in the bourgeois home, generally performed by a well-trained daughter or wife, is taken up by Courbet's middle brother, Martial, in Young Man Playing at the Piano. Here, too, the painter distorts the interior space to instill a sense of tension and unease. One critic referred to Courbet's depiction of the piano in this image as a frightening instrument of torture, threatening to crush both player and the viewer, an effect which could not be more apposite to Renoir's Woman at the Piano, which hung alongside Courbet's picture at the 1876 Impressionist exhibition, 77. In this depiction of a couple relaxing in a domestic space, Courbet exaggerates the distance between the two figures as well as their scale. The woman looms up against the picture plane in uncomfortable proximity to the viewer, and the reclining man is dwarfed by the oversized couch. His emasculation was called out by one critic who referred to him as a doll-sized puppet. Gendered reading roles have also been reversed. The more worldly practice of newspaper reading was generally ascribed to men, while women were stereotypically consumers of the novel, particularly contemporary pulp novels sold in quantity in small sizes. Game of Bézigue brings the painter's friends together with his brother Martial around a card table in the salon of his Paris apartment, deeply engaged in their shared game. Game of Bézigue was exhibited at the 7th Impressionist exhibition in 1882 alongside Renoir's Luncheon of the Boating Party, of almost exactly the same dimensions and the perfect counterpoint to Courbet's masculine genre scene. In Renoir's celebrated painting, which hung in the dining room of Durand-Ruel's home on the Rue de Rome, boisterous men and women are woven together in a swirling scene of conversation, flirtation, touch, and gaze. Hallucinatory in the kaleidoscopic array of bright colors illuminating this outdoor terrace along the sunny banks of the Seine, it shared the central salon of the exhibition with Courbet's interior scene of cerebral sparring. Strikingly converse to Renoir's lifelong celebration in paint of heterosexual desire, sensual women, and happy, healthy children. Courbet's oeuvre pictures the homosocial world in which he lived, its inhabitants, anxieties, and pleasures. While female portraits are rare in his oeuvre, Courbet created a significant body of portraits of his male friends, most of them well-to-do bachelors, fashionable and urbane. They sit and stand in private interiors, generally Courbet's own apartment, where they can relax into non-performative poses. He pulls in close to his sitters, confining their pictorial space in frank, uningratiating renderings cast in cool light. I'm going to skip over this next point. There's another wonderful picture, Monsieur Air, and a pastel in which the gender ambivalence of both of these pictures is foregrounded. Caillebott's inversion of the heteronormative assumptions of Impressionist genres by replacing the female figure with a male model extended to his scenes of modern life, where he and Manet play out a modernist call and response. And I'm showing you here At the Cafe, which replaces with a male model the sexually available female subject in Manet's Plum Brandy, or more spectacularly, 2 years after Caillebott's picture, Bar at the Folies Bergère. The handsome, muscled rower in Caillebott's Boating Party supplants the fashionable female sitters in Manet's Argenteuil and Boating as object of desire in the romantic genre of boating. The most striking instance of Caillebott disturbing a classically heterosexual genre is Manet at the Bath, in which he replaces the femme à la toilette motif with a male subject, a move entirely unprecedented in Impressionist depictions. Rendered in lively brushwork, the muscled small of the back, buttocks, and shoulders and arms, and his towel-rubbed flesh and hair express the artist's erotic subjectivity. The glimpse of the bather's genitals and his directed gaze further sexualize this vigorous, virile body. Signed and dated and almost life-size, this nude was clearly intended for exhibition. Caillebott's painting was not, however, presented publicly in Paris during the artist's lifetime. It was included as the first entry on a list that he had submitted to Durand-Ruel for the exhibition in 1888 in Paris, but it was not included in that show nor in the catalog. But instead, it seems to have been sent off to the more progressive avant-garde group known as Les Vins in Brussels later that year. The painting was also excluded from Durand-Ruel's 1894 retrospective. The intensity of desire traced in Man at Bath is emphasized in juxtaposition to Caillebott's only known female nude, Nude on a Couch. Despite including many of the prompts endemic to this highly codified genre, the sine qua non for the expression of heterosexual male desire, the reclining nude body caught in a moment, this is the genre of the reclining nude body caught in a moment of titillation, the discarded clothes, the proximity of the artist's viewpoint. Despite including all of those aspects, the painting carries very little in the way of an erotic charge. Stretched out on a dingy couch, the model's unidealized body shows signs of arousal, but not at the presence of the viewer. Instead of inviting the gaze of the artist viewer, displaying her body for visual delectation, she's focused on herself. Absent, too, are the framing devices signaling a voyeur's presence, such as the edge of a curtain or a door jamb, which, added to the realistic portrayal of the woman's skinny, hairy body and the sheer scale of the image, thwart the possibility of a comfortable, pleasurably voyeuristic experience. There's an example of a more compelling. This is Gustave Courbet's famous 1866 Woman with a Parrot in Counterpoint. Other paintings that seem not to have been excluded during the artist's during the artist's lifetime are the still lifes of dead animals produced in the early 1880s. Flayed calf, for example, in which this butchered animal is monumentalized in the shallow space of a storefront window, has been interpreted as a metaphor for the contemporary flesh trade, the exchange of money for the sexual consumption of young bodies. The impastoed touches of pink, coral, and salmon hues of the carcass interior connote the body's freshness, such that the animal feels not entirely dead. The garland of flowers and the singular rosebud, placed as if adorning the carcass's cleavage, suggest sexual advertisement and encourage the dynamic of attraction-repulsion in this image of beautifully described viscera. Most spectacularly disturbing is Chicago's life-sized flayed calf's head hanging next to an ox tongue. The delicately rendered calf's head in bluish tones of gray and white dangles next to a horrific ox tongue, the long swelling shaft emerging from the mutilated site of extraction. Just as Courbet's late paintings of dead trout have been read as realist allegories of the artist's existence, these works speak to Courbet's engagement with contemporary anxieties about sex and death, carnal satisfaction, and the pervasive, fatal threat of sexually transmitted disease. Commingling disgust and sensual pleasure, this raw image bears little affinity to the Impressionist paintings of Durand-Ruel's artists. Courbet's paintings show him working through contemporary issues with the realist's commitment to desentimentalized looking and an unflinching representation of milieu. Contesting dominant social ideologies, his work offers a unique account of modernité through an unsparingly personal lens, one that did not align with the values celebrated by Durand-Ruel's Impressionism. Apart from his role as an Impressionist collector, he is almost entirely absent from early histories of Impressionism, including Venturi's archives and Riewald's history. And museum galleries filled with the brightly colored meadows and light-struck waterways of France, of beautiful women in fashionable dresses and couples flirting in the sunshine, are still largely devoid of Courbet's work. His most critical paintings are key to our understanding of this seminal modernist movement, however, and their reinsertion into the Impressionist canon illuminates its normative contours. Thank you very much.